So we're on 292, the beginning of the book of Shemos, which is known by some of the commentaries who write an introduction before each of the books. And this book is known as the creation of the Jewish people, while the first book, the book of Bereshit, is the creation of reality, the creation of the world, the creation of people. This is now, we've gone from that to now the creation of the Jewish people specifically, which is what's going to happen in the next few weeks as we become, come from being a tribe based on a family, a single family, to now large enough. It's sort of like, that I went a couple weeks ago, so I know some of you know that I went, my father had his 90th birthday, so we went and we had pretty much the whole family. And probably the first time that we've done that outside of maybe a wedding, but where you actually have time together. And and he made note that the fact that when he was younger, he thought he'd have 3 kids, 4 kids, whatever, but that would be it. And then now he looks around the room and there's like 90 of us, from all over the place. So he realized that, over a short period of time, how big things can grow. And that's what's happening here. We go from being, Abraham's kids and then so forth and so on until you get to Yaakov's kids. So of course he had a lot of them. He had 12, but nevertheless, 12 sons. We still see how much it grows over a short period of time. In fact, as we get into it, there is a place where it talks about how, in a few lines, how the Jewish people grew. It uses the word, it says vayishritzu, and I'll show you when we get there. And it comes from the root word of sheretz. Sheretz is a disgusting bug. Right? And one of the traits of a bug is that they can have like 100 babies at one time, or right after each other. So it says that the Jewish people were fruitful and they grew like a sheretz does, right? It doesn't mean like we're like a bug. It means that like that trait, so that they had a lot of children. And so they went from, basically 70 people going down to Egypt, including some elderly people who couldn't have children, in a matter of a few hundred years, building up to a nation of 3 million people, which was pretty fast and large. It says that they had many, many children, not just one like we would normally do. They had multiple births. And the comment, it was an interesting commentary. One of them is called the Ibn Ezra, lived in the Middle Ages, and he said that he spoke to the doctors of his time to see, is this true? Is it possible for a woman to have 6 or 7 children at one time? Is that physically possible? Because the Medrash understands that that's what it's saying. Why would the Torah use this word vayishritzu, which is not a normal word, to talk about giving birth? Right? It's like a bug gives birth, right? So many at a time. So they told him then that a woman could give birth to up to 7 children at one time. That's what they told him in the Middle Ages. The doctor said that. And still, even when he wrote that, he was ridiculed all over the world. That it's not, that he must have misheard. It's a folklore. Nobody can have 7 children at one time. And then now we see in modern times that it happens. It doesn't happen a lot, but we have cases where women have given birth to 6, 7, 8 children, mostly because of the drugs that they take for it, but they still did it. So you see that's possible. So it begins by telling us, SHMOS b'nei Yisrael habayim mitzrayma. These are the names of the children of Yisrael, and here it means not only the Jews, but it means literally the children of Yisrael, Yisrael being Yaakov, who have come to Egypt. But the tense is actually wrong. It's in future tense, not past tense, right? Even if you're writing it at the time, you wouldn't write in future tense. You'd write it maybe in what we call in French they say like passé composé, which is like sort of present past. Right, so here it says, these are the names of Jewish people who are coming to Egypt. Now, so that they had already come, certainly, by the time this was done. So the commentaries ask about that, and they tell us it's a very important message. When the first group of Hebrews came to Egypt, we will soon see that they were settled on purpose in a land called Goshen, or a city called Goshen, which was a part of the metropolis, the main city, right by the Nile, where it was not such a nice area, and the Pharaoh sent all the Jews to live in that area. So the Jews wanted to be together. So Yosefs instructed that they should all live in this one area together, and you have like a Jewish community, which they did. But the idea is that for those people who came down, they never came down with the intent to become Egyptians. They came down with the intent to accomplish a goal and leave. So that's why it uses the word that not in the past tense, but in the future tense, that they were coming to Egypt, in order to tell us that they weren't living in Egypt, they were traveling through. But traveling through took a while, right? It's like, I'm on my way to Israel, but on my way to Israel, I may have to spend a year living in such and such a place. So am I living there? Yeah, I'm living there, but I'm not really I don't want to be a citizen. I want to get to where I'm going. That's how it was. Now, very shortly, even within this parsha, we'll see a change of attitude. That some of the upcoming generations of these people have decided they were going to settle, and they were going to live there, and they would go to theaters, and they would participate in culture, and they were wealthy. They became philanthropists and started to support the city, and they started to move out of Goshen into the general community, whereas you had Jews living among the non-Jews. Many of them no longer within a community. And this, we'll notice, is exactly the start of the Antisemitism when that happens. Not the virtue of the fact that the Jews were there, but that the Jews tried to assimilate into the non-Jewish culture to some extent. You start seeing, that's where Pharaoh wakes up and says, wait a minute, look at all these Jews all over the place. Right? We got a problem. We're going to have a war. They'll side with our enemies, throw us out, and they'll take over. Right? Why would he say such a thing? He didn't say it when they were all living in the Jewish community. Right? So it was a response to the fact that when Jews are acting like Jews are supposed to act, with a certain, ideas of morality, of ethics, of lifestyle, then they stay even if they're involved with the community, they stay somewhat to themselves and don't try to give up their identity. Then they're able to be peaceful. But as soon as they tried to give up their identity, the community rebelled against them. So we'll see that come up. So it says that's why it's in the future tense. So it says Es Yaakov Ishu Besu Ba'o. Yaakov himself and each person and their household came. That is, each of the families came. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. And it goes through all of the families. And then it says V'yamas Yosef, Echav, and then Yosef dies, and all of his brothers die. Right? As time goes on, we're now going into decades. So Yosef and that generation dies. V'kol Adorahu, the entire generation dies. Uvnei Yisrael, and at this point, the Jewish people, Paru v'Yishritzu, they became fruitful and they increased, like I explained. V'yirbu, and there were many of them. V'yatzbu, and they became strong. But ma'od, very much so. V'simala ha'aretz, and the land was filled with them. All right, so that's sort of like the background to the movie. And now we're going to begin the narrative, which begins, V'yakam melech chadash al Misraim, and a new king was established in Egypt. Right, so this could be good, this could be bad, right? Because we know that here, when we have elections, right, let's say we have Prime Minister Harper, he has certain rules, certain ideas, certain things he wants to do, and then what happens is certain things work, certain things don't work. So the other party will make use of the ones that don't work, and they'll say, you have to bring us in. They'll come in and take over the next election. And they will give up many of the initiatives that the first one did, even if they were good. And then people will have these enormous setbacks, or it could be positive, but sometimes it's a setback. That's what it means here. A new king came into Egypt, Asher lo yadu es Yosef, who didn't know Yosef. Why do they tell us that? So the commentaries explain, Rashi says it right here, that there's two meanings to this statement. One is, there was a new king. Kings die, right, and a new one comes. And this king came to adulthood after Yosef died, so he didn't really know what Yosef did. What did Yosef do? He saved the world. Yosef, because he understood the dreams of the Pharaoh and was able to initiate them, he created a economy for Egypt that even during a time when there was a total famine in the world, Egypt was prepared for it. You can imagine, if everyone has food, so food's only worth so much. But if no one has food, and you have food, that is not only worth the fact that you'll stay alive, but everyone will come to you for food, and you can charge them whatever you want. Right? So your economy is going to flourish in order for you to be able to help the rest of the world stay alive. So the king of Egypt should be very appreciative to Yosef, who basically created the economy for them. Otherwise, Egypt would not be around. So the Torah says it was a new king who didn't know Yosef. So it's a fact. What are you going to do? The guy wasn't around when Yosef was there. Yosef dies. He doesn't know what Yosef did, and therefore he treats the Jews differently. That's one opinion. The second opinion, which is a bit more frightening, is that it was the same Pharaoh, but he decided to ignore the fact that he knew Yosef, and he decided to do what he thought was best for himself. And that is that instead of showing gratitude to the offspring and the family of Yosef, which they had been doing, he decided, that's it, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to take care of these Jews the way I want to take care of them. I don't care that they were good to me. And this shows us the depravity of a human being, how far a human being could go. Here, the king of Egypt, if we would say that it was the same king who had the dreams, right, and the dreams tell him that your entire economy and your country, the most powerful country in the world, is going to fail. And the only reason it didn't fail was because of Yosef, who came and figured out how to do it. And then for that same king to go and to take Yosef's family and to consider them enemies and to make them into slaves was it's a horrible thing. It's the opposite of gratitude. Somebody comes and helps you and you do the opposite. And this shows you how far a person can fall. And this is an important message that we're going to get in this book of Shemos. Because at first we learned a lot about how the world is in the last book. In this one we're going to learn a lot about human personality and how human beings can be. On the one hand, you have this person who owes his entire life, his entire country, every person in the country to Yosef. And he chooses to ignore that and to make the Jews into criminals and to treat them the way he wants. Right? On the other hand, we have examples in the same book where the opposite happens. You have, for instance, with Moshe, as we'll see shortly, as Moshe is born, and he's born into a society where you're not allowed to have male Jews. Right? Part of the thing that the Pharaoh did is that if we kill all the boys who are born to the Jews, they'll have no army. So if something happens, we can wipe them out. 'Cause how hard is it for the Egyptian army to come and wipe out women? Right? So we're going to kill all the boys. Right? So Moshe's mother, as you know, puts him in a basket and he goes down the Nile, and Faros Daughter sees him. And it says that Faros Daughter hears a baby cry, pulls him in, opens up the thing, the little basket, and says, "Oh, it's a Hebrew baby, and I take him with me." That is to show that here this woman, right, who had owed nothing to anyone as far as she knew, she was right, goes out of her way to be a caring, loving person, and that even though this child was basically, according to her father, a criminal, because he wasn't supposed to be alive, you're supposed to kill him, she takes him in, and she raises him herself to do the opposite of what her father wanted. And here we see now how she takes a chance on her own life and raises herself up out of her care for human dignity and the importance of human life. So here we see the other extreme of people at the same time, and the Torah is sending us that message as well, that you can see human beings have the ability to sink to be the lowest of the low and the highest of the high. That's one of the things that we always see, that if a person falls, they can do things that animals would never do. Right? They can be like, animals don't kill for sport. They don't kill because it's fun. They don't kill because they get let's say some type of perverse pleasure out of it. They kill because they want to save their life or they're hungry. Right? Not that we should do such a thing, but at least that's logical. Human beings can go much worse. Human beings can kill because it's a sport. We can kill because we want to. We can kill because of any reason people do it. We can fall to such low levels. We can destroy people's lives. We can steal from them. We can do all kinds of things that animals would not do. because we can fall to such low levels. We learn that in this book. And at the same time, we can be like angels. We can go way out of our way and be way beyond what an animal could be. And we could be, right, people who act always for the best of others and always in a good way. And the Torah is sending the message to us that we, each one of us, have this same opportunity in our lives to either become wonderful, great people, sometimes at our own expense, using discipline and taking chances, or we can only be interested in the bottom line, how much money I have in the bank and how handsome or how beautiful this person is or who I relate to. And I can be on the lowest of the low. And that's what we find right here in this parsha. There's even more examples, and as we go through it in this parsha, I'll show it to you, but this is really the setting of that. So the new king comes, and he didn't know Yosef. V'yomer el Amon, he says to his people, Hine am b'nei Yisrael rav uvatzu mimenu. So in the beginning it said that the Jewish people increased greatly. Here Pharaoh says, look at this, the Jewish people are powerful and stronger than us. Right? So now already the Pharaoh is singling out the Jews, and he's telling his people that the Jews are very, very powerful. Now, haba nechachmalo, let's deal with them in a wise manner. Let's be smart about this. Pen yirbe, because there's going to be more of them. V'haya ki targvenu milchama, and if we will have a war, v'nosef gamhu al shonenu, the Jews will side with our enemies, and we'll have like guerrilla warfare. You'll have our own citizens. It sounds familiar. Our own citizens are going to come up and try to kill us. And they'll fight with us, and they'll throw us out of Egypt. They'll take over. Right? This is what he says. Now, we know that clearly, even though there were a lot of Jews at this time, that there weren't more Jews than Egyptians. And the fact that he says that tells us two messages, the commentaries say. One is because the Jews started leaving the Jewish area. You'd say if the Jews were in the Jewish area, and there were a lot of them, you'd see it. You'd see it. Like you have this, little part of the town, and it's filled with people. So you'd say, oh, look at all those Jews. And if you'd spread the Jews out, people wouldn't notice. But that's not true, because the one change in society was that at this point, the Jews felt like they were Egyptians. Many of them. They started to assimilate into Egyptian culture, and they started to move out of the Jewish area, as I said before. Now the Egyptians are noticing them in their own neighborhoods. They're seeing them wherever they look. Now, so even though there weren't more of them that way, it was actually appeared less. They're saying everywhere I look, there's a Jew. There's so many of them. This is the starting of anti-Semitism. I had a teacher who was a friend, but he was a wonderful teacher. He was Rabbi Malevsky I worked with, and he used to explain this. He was once the chief rabbi of Mexico. And he says that if you go down to Mexico and you go to a cab driver and you say, hey, Pedro, do you know any Jewish people in Mexico City? He'll say, oh, yes, senor. I know so many Jewish people. He says, the man who owns my cab, he's Jewish. My doctor, he's Jewish. The lawyer, he is Jewish. The man who owns the building I live in, he is Jewish. Oh, sir, I know many Jewish people. So he'd ask them, so Pedro, how many Jews do you think there are in Mexico City? He'd say, oh, senor, probably 5-6 million. Everywhere you go, they're Jewish. Mm-hmm. Right? And the reality is there's like 0.01% of Jews in Mexico City. So, but why does it appear to him that? Right, he's not even being anti-Semitic in what he's saying, but it's an anti-Semitic idea, which is everybody of power that I deal with is a Jew. So there must be so many Jews, because if everyone in power that I deal with is Jewish, how many Jews are not in power? Right? If my lawyer, my doctor, the guy who owns my building, the guy who owns my cab, they're all Jewish, so that must be that there's millions of them here. And in Mexico City at this time was the largest city in the world, and there weren't that many Jews. But that was the picture they had, and that's what Pharaoh saw. Pharaoh, he'd look around, and there's a Jew in the theater, and there's a Jew in government, and there's a Jew here, there's a Jew here, there's a Jew here, and they're starting to intermarry, and they want to marry our kids, and, wait a minute, there's too many of these Jews, so we got to do something about it. And that's what's happening here, and that only happens when we start to assimilate. So his statement is they're going to throw us out. So what does he say? He says, "Ve'yisimu alav sari misim." We're going to put upon them these sort of sergeants, laman onoso, in order to inflict pain on them, sivlosam, and suffering. Vayavan ari mishkenos leFaro, and they went and built these special cities for Pharaoh, as Pisum vs. Ramses, the city of Ramses and the city of Pisum. But even here it says, "Vayisimu alav sari misim." Right? We know from if you read the Haggadah right? They were taskmasters. In other words, they were like the heads of the slaves. You make the Jews into slaves, and you give them a guy with a whip, and you tell them, you make the Jews do what I tell you to do, right? I want them to build a city for me, so go out there and make them build the city. So they would go out with their whips, and they'd make the Jews work 18-hour days and do it. That's the traditional picture we get, and there is truth to that. However, at this point, some of the people I spoke to told me that that's not really what the words say. That's the common understanding, but that's not what the words say. There's words here that it says, "Vesimu alav sare misim." Sare misim. A sar is a prince or a minister, right? But it means a person representing the government. And we said that. But misim, right? They translate as a taskmaster. In other words, he's in charge of the slaves. But a mas, mem samech in Hebrew, is a tax, not a task, a tax, like paying taxes. And therefore they said that what they did first is before they made the Jews into slaves, they gave them a Jew tax, which was not uncommon throughout history. And what was that? It would be a Jew tax like they had in Europe in different times of history. Is if, let's say, a Jew would work and he'd make $1,000, he'd have to give 90% of his money to taxes, while everybody else gave 5% of their money to taxes. But Jews, because they were Jews, and we give you the privilege of living in our country, you have to pay 90%. So it says that they say that that's what he was doing here. The first thing he did is he took away all the Jews' wealth, because the Jews were successful. They worked hard. They made money. I'll take away their wealth, because wealth means power. If they don't have wealth, they don't have power. So he says that's what he did. And then they created these people to oversee them. So then it says, and as we will do this, right? So to them, it'll keep them from growing so much, and we'll make it harder on them. And that's where it says that it got to the point where they tell them to make the pyramids, and then it tells them make it without straw, right? You have to find a better way to do it, right? And it keeps going on and making it harder and harder and harder and harder for them. And so what we have now is a description of what it is that the government is going to do in order to subjugate the Jews so that they should not rebel against the government. And then that story finishes. Yeah?
I wanted to ask you, anti-Semitism, isn't it based on being envious and jealous? And
well, that's
what other people have?
Certainly that's some of it, but anti-Semitism is the most illogical of the hatreds, because to the communists we're capitalists, and to the capitalists we're communists. To the rich we're poor, and to the poor we're rich. Jews sponge off society, and Jews own everything. How can that be? Right? It's not possible. You can't do both. Right? Jews run Hollywood, right? They say, and yet there's no Jews in movies, right? They have all of these contradictions that go on in the areas of economy and so forth that you see, and anti-Semitism is really it uses different things like you just said, but it's really it's so absurd that it shows you that it's coming directly from God. Now, the anti-Semitism is a tool in its early stages that God uses to help us remember who we are. We're not talking about killing Jews. It can't help you to kill you. It means that early on, right? And we'll see how Pharaoh does this. In the beginning, when Pharaoh starts to subjugate the Jews, the idea is, in most cases, it's the Jews become aware something's wrong. They fix what's wrong spiritually, and then the anti-Semitism stops. What happens with Pharaoh is that he kept doing it. He kept at it. That's why Pharaoh's punished. Because if all you're doing is God's will, God wants you to do this to the Jews to help wake them up, then you're not going to get punished. Pharaoh is punished because he kept doing it. He wanted to hurt them. But that's really where it comes from. So now it changes. We have now a total change in the discussion. That ends, and now we begin in verse 15 with a very interesting story. It tells us in the English, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, okay, so you have these two Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of the first was Shifra, and the name of the second was Pua. Okay, so these are the names of the midwives, which, by the way, those are not their names. Those are what we'd call a nom de guerre. They're aliases that they used, and we'll see why. And he said to them, when you deliver the Hebrew women, and you see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you're to kill him. If it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and they didn't do as the king of Egypt spoke to them, and they caused the boys to live. All right, so watch. This is going to be a totally absurd story. What happens at first is that the Pharaoh goes to the midwife, says, if a woman gives birth, kill the boy so you can let the girls live. The women say to themselves, we can't do that. God would not allow us to kill babies, so they didn't listen to him. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives. The king of Egypt sees the boys aren't being killed, so he says to them, why you've done this thing, that you've caused the boys to live. You let the boys live. Why? So here's their answer, which makes absolutely no sense. It says, the midwives say to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are like the Egyptian women, for they are experts. Before the midwife comes to them, they've given birth. Right? Stop right there. That's the end of that part of the story. So here's what happens. Pharaoh says, when the women give birth, right, if it's a boy, you kill him. If it's a girl, you let her live. They didn't listen, because they're not going to murder babies. Right? They're midwives. They're not going to murder a baby. So Pharaoh comes and says, why didn't you kill the boys like I told you? And they said, because the Hebrew women are stronger than the Egyptian women. By the time we get there, they gave birth already. So what are we supposed to do? So what's Pharaoh's answer? What would you think he'd say?
Kill him.
Kill him. You know what I mean? Anyway, how are you supposed to kill him otherwise? The woman gave birth to a boy, you kill the baby. Right? What are they saying to him? They said, you told us if a woman gives birth to a boy, we should kill him. But we can't. Why? Because when the woman gave birth to a boy, he was already born. Well, of course he was already born. How are you going to kill him if he's not born? So this tells us that we're not reading this right. There's an error here. And the same rabbi who taught me the last thing, he showed me how this was. And he says that this is how you're supposed to read this, very differently. This is the king of Egypt went to the Hebrew midwives, right? And he says, when you deliver the Hebrew women, you see them on the birth stool. What is a birth stool? Ever heard of such a thing, of a birth stool? You know, women who give birth on a stool? Right? Have you know midwives? Did any ever hear of a midwife who tells a woman to sit on a stool to give birth? Or a doctor tells them to? So maybe they had some type of invention we don't have, different culture. But this teacher told me that's not what the word means. The word is not a birth stool. That's not what the Hebrew word is. It's not the word birth and not the word stool. He says the following, that back then, the women had a wisdom that they were able to tell the gender of the baby when it was still within the mother by using a certain tool that they had. And that tool could tell them if it was a boy or a girl. And so now if we know that, so Pharaoh says, right, he goes to them and he says, when you deliver the Hebrew women and you use your tool on them, right, if it's a boy, kill him, and if it's a girl, she should live. Right? And then they didn't do it. And they said, what do you want? By the time we got there, the boys were born. Now it makes sense, because he's telling him to abort them. He's saying, if the women are going to have a boy, and you figure that out with your tool, make an abortion on the boy. That if it's a girl, she can give birth. Well, we couldn't do it, because by the time we got there, they gave birth. So now it makes sense, right? Because he's not telling him to murder babies. He's telling him to abort them. At this point, it seems that Pharaoh did not feel they had enough power to go and tell women to murder children. But to tell women to abort a child, that he could do. So that's what it seems that he's really saying. And it's because, according to this teacher I had, there's a mistranslation of that word. The word is not a stool that they sat on. It was a tool that people had to tell them the gender. And if a woman knows while the baby, like you have it now in China, right, where they have this rule, you're only allowed to have one child. So a woman would have a child. So if it was going to be a girl, they didn't want to have the girl. They wanted to have a boy in China. So what they do is they'd find out, right, while she's still pregnant, if it's a boy or a girl. They would, do a test. They find out that it's a girl, they'll abort the child, right, and then they'll try again. And next time if it's a boy, they'll have the boy, right? That's just how they are, right? But they used technology to get the answer. Here also, they had technology. A different type of technology in this. They had a certain knowledge. They could tell if the fetus was a boy or a girl. And the fact that they knew that it was a boy, they would abort it. And that makes now perfect sense. Right? So somehow throughout history we've lost this knowledge, and there are many times you'll see in the Torah where there are things that they talk about that we don't know how to do anymore. So, but they did that. So therefore we can see that what Pharaoh is saying, he's trying to kill the boys so they don't make an army, right? But he does it by going to the midwives. Now, who were they, and why were they called Shifra and Puah? Shifra and Puah are not their real names. So Rashi tells us that Shifra and Pua were Miriam and Yocheved, Moshe's sister and his mother. He was not born yet. They were midwives. That was their job. And they were called Shifra and Pua for a special reason. It says Shifra was that because she was L'shaper es hatino. She would make the baby pretty. So, Rashi explains that when babies were born, right, their heads get squished and they're all bloody. So she would wipe them off and clean them, and she would try to mold their head a bit to look normal, and then give the baby to the mother so the mother should love the baby because he's beautiful. Right? And Pua was called that because when she would see the baby, she would make a sound with her mouth of a poo poo poo, so that the babies would smile and the mothers would see the baby smile and they'd love the baby. They say, so why is that a big deal? So the example I heard once was that you imagine, you have a 3-year-old kid, and the 3-year-old kid's running through the house and he falls down and he hurts himself badly. You don't know what it is. He's in a lot of pain. So you rush with him to the hospital. You get to the emergency room. They see there's something wrong. They grab the baby without any, hello, how are you? They take them from inside. They start working on him. Right? The mother's nervous. Right? The baby's crying. The doctors are working really fast. Right? And they want to save the baby. So do they take any time to say, let's get this kid a doll, right, while we're working on him so that the kid's not afraid? No, they don't. They want to save his life. They're only thinking about that. They're not thinking about that he's afraid, that his mother's not with him, that he's hungry. That's all, right? But in comes this one nurse, and she sees the baby's afraid, so she brings him a little doll, and the baby holds the doll, and he's not afraid anymore, right, during the whole thing. So it's not a necessity to do that, but she took the interest to care for that child, right? So it was an enormous thing that she does. That's what they did. Here they are, where they're supposed to kill babies. Women go through all this pain to have a baby, and then they're going to kill them. So they went and they would make the baby pretty and make the baby smile, so the mother should feel good about the baby. And that's why they were called by those names. And that was because it was very important that they did that. They went beyond what they had to do. They did what they could do. And so it goes on. It says that the last line here, that God benefited the midwives, and the people increased and became very strong. And it was because the midwives fears God that He made them houses. So also a funny statement. So because the midwives, not only they acted like Shifra and Pua, like I just explained, but also that they took a chance with their own lives, and they didn't do what Pharaoh said, to abort the kids. It said that because of it, God benefited them, that there were lots and lots of Jews born, right? So they had a lot of work, and He built them houses. So what does that mean? He built them houses. Like God went and he was a contractor and He built a house. Right? That's certainly not the case. So the commentaries say that we use this word house to, like in English. You have a word house, meaning where you live, but then you have like a house, a design house. Versace has a design house, right? Saint Laurent has a design house. They don't have a design factory. They don't have a design office. They don't have an artist's room. They have a house. Because sometimes that's how things are referred to. We have it in Hebrew also. We have the house of Levi and the house of Kohen, right? You have Beis Kahuna, right? That is the Kohens come from here. It's their house, so to speak. It's not literally a house. It means that it's a tribe, right, or a group. The group of Levis, the group of Kohen. They're called Beis this, Beis that. So it says here that they made them houses. What does it mean to make them houses? So Miriam, right? Miriam, Moshe's sister, right? She had Beis Levi. From her came, right? She was a Levi. So when she got married, the people in her house were Levies. Then you had Yocheved, the mother. From her came Aaron and Moshe. Aaron was the founder of Kohen. So the house of Kohen came from her. So it says that God rewarded these women that 2 illustrious houses among the Jews would come from them. Not that He built them a house to live in. Right? What do you think is more significant? Like that God, that you went and you dedicated your life and risked your life, so God gave you a prize. He gave you a house, like you won the sick kids hospital, lottery. or that you will be forever remembered as the founder of this very important thing, right? You know, like nobody knows who the mother of Albert Einstein was, but if we did, right, people would say how special she must have been because look what came from her. So here we know that all the Kohanim came from her because of her, right? And that's what it's telling us. So Pharaoh commands. Now, what happens is, remember I told you before that they're supposed to abort the child, not murder the child. Another proof is this next line. Pharaoh commands his entire people, saying, every son there will be born into the river, you should throw him, every daughter you should live. Now he switches it. He says, oh, you don't want to listen to me to abort the boys? Now, every boy that's born, you have to throw him in the river. Before they're born, you abort them. Now, that doesn't work. You're not going to listen to me? So if a boy is born to the Jews, he has to be thrown into the river. Right? He takes it a step further. And the way that we saw it before, saying that they were sitting on a stool, that makes no sense. Including this line makes no sense. Now it makes sense. Right? What we have now in this section is another change. What we're doing is we're going through different parts of history, but they're all at the same time, but they're building up to what we're going to learn in the whole book. So the next thing it tells us that a man from the house of Levi took a daughter of Levi. Though here, in today's world, right, I'm going to talk about this on Shabbos in my class, a man is not allowed to marry a person like this. Right? He's a man from the house of Levi, took a daughter of Levi. That means a man married his aunt. Right? He's from the house of Levi, means he's a Levi. Therefore, he was a grandson of Levi, right? Because you know from the generations. And he married a daughter of Levi. So if his grandfather is Levi and his wife is a daughter of Levi, he married his aunt, right? So today you're not allowed to marry your aunt. The Torah says it's against the Torah for a person to do that. But then the Torah hadn't been given. And it says the woman conceived and she gave birth to a son. And she saw that he was good, and she hid him for 3 months. That was Moshe. So here you see already a very interesting idea, which is Moshe's background, right, as being born, was not from some famous religious family. He was born into a family that if he had been born after the Torah was given, he would have been a forbidden offspring of a forbidden marriage. He would have been what we call a mamzer. Right? That's a very terrible thing, right? But it was from before the Torah. So this is very often used as a proof to the Torah, because if you look at the history books from the early eras, every nation that was around, Rome, Greece, Persia, Babylon, the Assyrians, going all the way back, if you ever read any history about them written by them, they never lost a war. Everybody was happy. Everything was great. Why? Because they wrote history the way they wanted to write history. They didn't tell the truth. So what do? Here's our book of history. A person will say, God didn't give you this book, it's a history book. So what did we do? Our greatest leader of all time comes from a family that if the book that he gave us was true, he would have been come from a family that was a bad family. Right? So you see, what it's telling us is that the Jewish Torah, the Jewish history, tells us all the warts and pimples of our leaders. We do not say that our leaders are perfect. Our rabbis are not perfect. Our rabbis make mistakes. Our leaders make mistakes. Our leaders come from all kinds of backgrounds and families. It's the individual that's important. So and you learn from that, no matter where you come from, right? If your family was religious, not religious, wealthy, not wealthy, it makes no difference. Everything is decided with you, right? That's what's important. And they tell a story about the Maggid Mezrich, who was the student of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. So he was the first student of the founder of the Hasidic movement. And it says that one time he came home as a little boy, and he sees his mother sitting outside the house crying. And he says to her, "Why are you crying?" She says, "Look behind me. The house is burning down. It's on fire. It's going to be destroyed." So she says, so we'll get another house. A little boy, but he tells me, "I've got another house. The world's not going to fall apart. Don't cry." So she says, "I'm not crying for the house. Inside the house is my family tree. Now, my family, they go all the way back to King David. And it has charted my father to his father to his father to his father, going all the way back 1,000 years to King David. And we go so far back, I won't be able to have it anymore. The family tree is gone." So he says to her, "You don't worry, Mom. The family tree will start with me." Right? And it did, because he became a great, great person. But this teaches us the message. It makes, in the Jewish world, it makes no difference where you come from, who you come from, what it was like. You have the ability to be great. We see that in every case. You have this, not just here. You have King David. King David was the one child in his family, whose mother was different, and he was considered the least likely to become anything. In fact, when the prophet tells his father, "I have been told by God that the next king of Israel will be one of your sons. Bring your sons together, and I'll meet them, and I'll find out which one it is." He brings all his sons together, but he doesn't bring David, because David is for sure is not the right one, for sure. And he leaves David out in the field, and the prophet comes and says, "I don't know, something's wrong. He's not here. Whoever it is, not here. Do you have any more children?" He said, "Yeah, it was David." How about Solomon, the great King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived? His mother was Bathsheba. The story of David and Bathsheba we have all heard about. If it was a sin or not a sin, there's something funny about the relationship with David, who marries a woman whose husband he has killed. Right? He has her husband, so to speak. Not literally that way, but basically he wants to get rid of her husband, so he sends him to the war. And before they went to the war, every man who went to the war used to write a divorce for his wife in case he didn't come back, and they didn't know where he was. So he went out, and he gets killed. So King David marries his wife. Now, which sounds terrible. The Gemara says that if you know the whole story, it's not terrible, but certainly it's odd. And who was their child? Solomon, one of the wisest, greatest people of history. So you see from this that while the parents have to do what's right, it doesn't mean, if they don't do what's right, or you don't have the greatest background, it doesn't mean you're going to be a nobody. You'll be whoever you want to be. You just have to do it. That's what it says here. So here you have this man from the house of Levi. Another thing that we learn from this is they don't tell you who they are, and nevertheless they have Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam as children. And the reason is because the Torah doesn't want you to think it was because of who they were. Because they happen to be, even though what he did by marrying this way was not to be accepted later, but at that time it was fine. The man from the house of Levi was Avram, who was the head of the Jewish people at the time, and the daughter of Levi was Yocheved, one of the midwives that I told you about, who's also a great person. But it doesn't tell you who they are, because they don't want you to think that because they were great, that's why Moshe was great. Right? That's why it doesn't tell you that. Later on in the Torah it tells you. So it says, so the woman conceived, she gave birth to us, right? And she kept him, and they said that she saw that he was good, and she hid him for 3 months. How many women have a baby and don't think he's good? A 3-month-old baby. How many people actually say this is a bad baby? Everyone thinks so. Why does the Torah tell you that? So it says that it doesn't mean that he was good, rather than crying all the time. She saw that there was something different about him. It was something extraordinary. First thing is, he was born circumcised. The Torah tells us, well, the Medrash tells us that he was already circumcised. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're born circumcised, it means you're better, but it definitely means something, and he was. It says that he also didn't cry, loud, because if he did, then the soldiers would come and find that his mother had a baby and take him, and kill him. Right, but it got to the point where he was getting too big, so she couldn't hide him anymore. So she put him in a basket, right, and she puts him in the water, and and he goes down the Nile. She doesn't want to just throw him in the Nile like the king says, so she puts him in a basket. And what am I going to do? They're going to kill him, right? So she puts him in the basket, and she says, "What happens, happens. I mean, what can I do?" So it says his sister stationed herself at a distance to know what would be done. Now, we have a number of very interesting things in this story. Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe by the river. So now you have the daughter of the Pharaoh, right? The same Pharaoh who said that all Jewish boys have to be killed. She goes down to the river to take a bath, because they didn't have bathtubs. She goes down with her servants, right? Take a bath. Her maidens walked along the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her servants and took it. She opens it and saw him, the boy, and then it says a youth was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew boys." So let's hear it again and see what's wrong with this. Right? So she's going down to the river, right? She doesn't see that. Sees this basket, right? She takes they bring in the basket, right? She opens it. She saw the boy, right? And then it says a youth was crying.
Not the boy.
Yeah, who's a youth? Not a baby. He's a baby. A youth in Hebrew, is telling you an adolescent. Who's that? Right? Simply, you think it's talking. The baby starts crying. So she took pity on the baby, and she says, "Oh, this is a Hebrew baby. Why? Because why else is he in the river?" Right? So, if we look before, the line said, his sister stationed herself at a distance to know what would be done. So it says that Miriam, his sister, Moshe's sister, was hiding to make sure he didn't drown, and she sees this happen. But then it uses the masculine to say that a youth was crying. From this we understand that was Aaron, his older brother, was also hiding down there, and that he saw what was happening to his younger brother, and it made him cry. And because he was crying, it says that God took pity on the baby, and so she took pity on the baby and saved his life. Right? That's how we can understand it. So now she takes him, right? Then his sister just happens to show up, right? Says to Faros Daughter, "Should I get you a wet nurse?" Right? Of course, a baby nurses, right? And just like today, a woman is not pregnant, she doesn't have milk. I mean, she doesn't give birth, she doesn't have milk. So she tells the Faros Daughter didn't have milk. So she goes, "Should I get you a nurse that can nurse him? Otherwise, he's going to die." And because I'll get a Hebrew woman, because who's going to nurse the baby for you? So she goes and gets her own mother, who's the mother of Moshe, to nurse him. And so the daughter of Pharaoh says, "Yeah, go." And the girl went and summoned the boy's mother. Pharaoh's daughter says, "Take this boy and nurse him for me, and I'll give you pay." Right? So now Miriam, Moshe's mother, basically takes care of her own son, who's now alive, who is now the prince of Egypt. He has now been taken by the princess as her child into the castle. The most amazing thing is that, you see, Pharaoh had a dream, and his dream was that the Jews are going to try to take us over, and there's going to be a savior for them. He's going to be born on this day, the 7th day of Adar, and he's going to save the Jews. So Pharaoh says, "All right, we got to kill all the boys who are born, because we're going to get born now, because that way we'll get rid of the savior." So they go and they take all the boys, throw them in the river, and what happens? His own daughter saves the savior of the Jews and raises them in his house. Right? So here's like the most amazing part of the story is that they take Moshe, right, who later goes head to head with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh raises him in his own house. Right? So that's what happens, right? So she says, so the woman took the baby, she nursed him. The boy grew up and brought him to the daughter of Pharaoh, and he was a son to her. She called his name Moses, as she said, "For I drew him from the water." And then it happens in those days that Moshe grew up. Stop there. There's a couple of more problems here. So it says first, the mother's raising him, and then he gets old enough that he doesn't need to be nursed, so she brings him to the castle to go back to the princess. Right? So it says the boy grew up, and she brought him to the daughter of Pharaoh. She called his name Moses. Pharaoh's daughter called him Moses. Right? Now the Torah tells us, or the Talmud tells us, that Moshe had 10 different names. Of all the names, the one name that stuck was Moshe. Moshe is not a Hebrew name; it's an Egyptian name, even though it has a Hebrew root. And it was named by. You think if you're going to give a name to the greatest leader of the Jews, you're going to give him a name that his mother gave him, right? Not a name that some Egyptian woman gave him. Nevertheless, the Torah gives him. They say why? They say because Moshe means I drew him from the water. Means, in other words, that Moshe should always feel gratitude for the fact that his life was saved. So his name was Moshe. But that's not what Moshe means. Moshe doesn't mean that I drew him from the water. It means I will draw from the water. I will take people from the water. Right? It's a different grammar. So why does it tell us one thing and it's really another? And the answer is that God is sending a message. If you want to be a great Jewish leader like Moshe, you have to always remember what happened to you, right? That someone saved you. You were saved in the water, and you have to save others. And therefore, throughout Moshe's life, he does that. And that's why it says, you notice it says in the beginning, the boy grew up. Then it says she calls him Moshe. And then it says he grew up. We already knew he grew up. Why are you telling me he grew up again, a line later? He grew up. She calls him Moshe, and he grew up. Well, he did grow. We know that. So you can say, all right, he grew to one age, grew to another age. But it's the same paragraph. So it's telling you an important thing. One statement is that Moshe grew up. He got older. Babies grow up. Right? The other one is that he became a gadol, because the word in Hebrew is vayikdal, that he became big. A gadol, in our understanding, means a great person, not a big person, a great person. So the first time it's telling you that Moshe became a big person. He became older. The second time it's telling you he became a special person. What is the definition of a gadol among the Jews, a great person among the Jews? Is it not only a person with great wisdom, but a person who's humble and who cares for others, even at their own expense, will do anything to help other people, which is what Moshe became. So the Torah tells us first, Moshe got older. Then it says, not only that, Moshe became great. He became a gadol. Why? And then it tells us why. It happened in those days, and Moshe grew up, and he went out to his brethren, and he observed their burdens. Right? So, I mean, look at this picture. Moshe is a baby. He's raised in the house of corruption, of excess, of money, right, of royalty. Right? He could live his whole life as the prince of Egypt. He could become the next Pharaoh. I mean, all he has to do is take it easy and live through it. Right? Like anything he wants, he can have. Anything, he can do anything. He can kill people and no one can do anything to him. I mean, he's Pharaoh's son. He's the prince of Egypt. And what does he do? He goes out among his brothers who are slaves, and he feels their pain. Like, what's with this guy? The guy is he could be the most powerful man in the world, and he goes and he does that. And that's telling you what it means, that he became great. That's the definition of great, that you care for other people, that you went out and he felt the pain of his brothers. And he saw an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man. He turns this way and that way, and he saw that no one was looking, so he hit the Egyptian man and he buried him in the sand. Right? So basically, in a simple understanding, Moshe sees that a slave is being beaten by an Egyptian. So Moshe says, this is not right. The slave is my brother, and he's beating him for no reason. Right? So he looks this way and that way to make sure nobody sees. And then it says that in the Hebrew it's more understandable, that he took a name of God, that is a very powerful name, and he said it at him. It's like he cursed him, and the Egyptian died. He takes the Egyptian and he buries him in the sand. And now he's in trouble. Because it's one thing that the son of Pharaoh could kill people, but you can't kill a member of the government. Right? You can't kill, like, if Pharaoh tells this guy, take care of the Jews, and then you kill him, like, Pharaoh's going to come after you. It makes no difference if you're from his house. You're his son. He'll just say that my adopted son is a rebel and kill him. Right? So he's going to run away. Right? He doesn't know what to do now. He's afraid that he's going to get in trouble. But he takes some time, because it says he goes out the next day, and now he sees two Jews fighting. So he says to the wicked one, why are you hitting your friend, your other one? Right? So the guy says, who makes you the boss? That you are a judge and a ruler over us. Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? Right? So we have to know this whole story. First thing is he goes out, he sees two Jews fighting, and they're fighting with each other, and Moshe, right, says to the one wicked one, why do you hit your friend? How does he know he's the wrong one, that he's the bad guy? The answer is that if you're going to hit another Jew, you're a bad guy. That's the answer. A person who strikes another person is a bad person. It's wrong. You can't do that. All right? So he said, just by virtue of the fact that he did it, he knew that. Now, the guy, instead of saying okay or running away, he says, Moshe, who do you think you are? You're telling me what to do? Who are you? You're a nobody. You're raised in the Pharaoh's castle. You're just a Jew just like me. What do you think? You can get away with telling me what to do? And if I don't listen to you, you're going to do to me what you did to that Egyptian yesterday? You killed him? So Moshe now knows he's in trouble. He says, indeed the matter is known. People found out. And then he runs away. And he leaves Egypt. Right? And the whole story switches to another country for Moshe. But we have to understand what happens here. So this is how the Midrash explains the story, and it's another example of showing you how high or how low a person can go. And this is what happens. Pharaoh sets up these taskmasters to go and get the Jews to work. So it says that there was this one taskmaster who would go real early in the morning. It's still dark. He'd wake up the Jews and make them go to work. He sees that there's this one fellow he's got a beautiful wife. So what he does is he tells the guy to go to work, makes him leave, and when he leaves, he sneaks into the house, and it's dark out. He pretends he's the husband, and he has relations with the man's wife. And then he leaves. So, and who was the man? His name was Dosan. That was his name. We get his name later. Now, Dosan is now out working. He comes home, right? Doesn't even know. His wife thinks that she had relations with her husband. She doesn't know. So this guy Dosan, right? He goes out to work, and the man who had relations with that guy's wife, the Egyptian, is afraid that he's going to do something about it. He's going to find out that I had relations with his wife. He's going to do something about it. So he beats him. Moshe comes along and kills that Egyptian. So he saves the life of Dosan, right? He saves that guy's life. That's how Dosan would know that Moshe did it. He's right there, right? He should have gratitude to Moshe for saving his life, because this Egyptian was going to kill him to get his wife, right? So Moshe does that. The next day, this guy Dosan is hitting another Jew. Moshe comes by and says, "Don't do that. You shouldn't do that." He says, "Well, who are you to tell me I can't do that? Right? You're going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" So now you see how low this guy can go. Instead of having gratitude to Moshe, to say, you saved my life, he says, "Who are you? You go around killing people. Life means nothing to you. You grew up in Pharaoh's house. You're cruel, right? You're going to kill me next." In other words, he shows absolutely no gratitude. Moshe, on the other hand, shows that even though he had no need, no necessity to go and go with the Jewish people, he could have stayed in the castle as the king and had a great time playing Nintendo all day, right? But instead, he goes out among them. That shows you how great a person can be. And then this guy Dosan shows you how terrible a person can be, right? And another example of the same thing. Because he does this fellow does this to Moshe, Moshe now has to run away, right? And he runs to the land of Midian, which is just outside of Egypt. And there we have this whole story of Moshe meeting what eventually becomes his wife by a well, and her father. And you see another example of the same thing in this paragraph, and then we'll have to stop. It says, the minister of Midian had 7 daughters. Right? That was Yisro. Jethro, you've heard his name before. He had 7 daughters. They came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's sheep. So the 7 daughters went out, right, to take care of their father's sheep and give them water. The shepherds, now these are men from other families, they came and sent these women away, right? They're not as strong as the men. The men said, "We want to water our sheep. We want to give our sheep water. You get out of here. I don't care that you're first. Bunch of women, get out of here." Right? That's what he's saying. The shepherds came and drove them away. Moshe, who was there, excuse me, who'd been escaping, he saved them, and he gives the women's sheep water. So they go back to their father, and the father says, "Hey, what are you doing here so early? You're supposed to be watering the sheep." They said, "Oh, you wouldn't believe what happened. This Egyptian came." Excuse me. The Egyptian came and he saved us because the shepherds were trying to push us away. And not only he did it, but he fed our sheep for us. So the father says, "Where is he?" "You left him there? Where is he?" So you imagine, here you have a father who's got 7 daughters, right? Not married girls. They go out and they're molested by these shepherds. A stranger who looks like an Egyptian, which Moshe looked like an Egyptian, even though he was a Jew, because he wore the robes of Pharaoh's son, right, comes and saves them. Not only saves them, takes care of their animals for them, right? And what do? They leave. The father says, "What? That's how I raised you? That's how you show gratitude? Go get him and bring him back here." Right? We have to show the men that we appreciate it. So they do. And he comes back and they make a meal for him and they give him a place to stay, and eventually he marries one of those girls.